Who is to be blamed for these protests? Donald Trump? Is he the perpetrator or the victim? Well, if you ask me, I'd say he's both. And I'll explain. Why do I say he's a perpetrator? Because Trump's statements made things worse. You cannot deny that. He fueled the protest further rather than quelling the anger. And then the president tried to use them, the protests, as an opportunity. He called himself the law and order president. He sent federal troops to the states. Before that, he had Washington's Lafayette Square cleared so that he could stage a photo op. This was on the 1st of June. And that's not it. He called the protesters terrorists, criminals, arsonists, Antifa. To be fair, some of the protesters did indulge in looting and arson, which was wrong. But the president's response was a political disaster. As the head of the country, he should not have fanned the fires. He did. Now, why do I say that the president is a victim too? Because first of all, it would be unfair to blame Trump alone for hate crimes. For what happened to George Floyd. Racism has been a part and parcel of the American society forever. Donald Trump did not bring it. And second, who gains from these protests? Who gains from Donald Trump slipping approval ratings? Is it just a coincidence that these protests are raging months before the election? Does the opposition have a role to play here? Is Donald Trump a victim of opposition-fueled protests? Don't dismiss that question. I'll tell you why I ask this. Because protests of this scale, or rather sustained protests of this scale, are not usual in the United States. There are fault lines in the American system, like racism, inequality, gender-based discrimination, but they mostly remain dormant. You know, like they say, there are decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. Well, we're seeing such weeks. There have been times where the fault lines in America have exposed themselves and have erupted into volcanoes of protest. This has happened under several other presidents. Donald Trump happens to be among the unlucky ones, and he does not help himself with his words. Let me give you some examples from history. The Red Summer of 1919 makes for a particularly interesting case study. It was the first time that these fault lines erupted so fatally. President Woodrow Wilson was in the White House. There were racial clashes across America, including big cities like Chicago and Washington. The division between the whites and African Americans were out in the open. And so was the bitter truth that the American Constitution and the Civil War had failed to resolve the conflicts of slavery. There was something that connects the clashes of 1919 to the current protests. Do you know what that is? A pandemic. The protests in 1919 came at the heels of the Spanish flu pandemic. Then we come to the 1960s, another decade when the fault lines erupted. There were protests between 1963 and 68. They were fueled by years of racial segregation. This time, the protests were under Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. The Kennedy administration also faced protests against inequality. There was a famous march in Washington for jobs and freedom in 1963, which led to the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. Neither racism nor discrimination is Donald Trump's brainchild. These are fundamental problems with the American society that numerous administrations have failed to fix. The police department, for example. There are not enough black officers. In 2017, just 17%, of the new hires were African American. In Los Angeles, black officers make up just 9% of the police force. In America, a black adult is 5 times more likely to be stopped by the police compared to a white man. Nearly 2/3 of black adults in America say they have been in situations where people acted as if they were suspicious of them. There is the problem of the gender pay gap. An American woman earns 82 cents for every $1 earned by a man. What about those sitting in judgment of Donald Trump? Obama, for example, he spoke very strongly. The numbers were equally bad during the Obama administration under a black president. A survey conducted during Obama's presidency found that 69% of the Americans felt that race relations continued to be mostly bad. While Barack Obama acknowledged that racism is deeply rooted in the American culture, he avoided addressing it openly, and that does not help. So Donald Trump did not usher in these problems. He's guilty to the extent that as president, he did not really try to solve them either. He remained silent against racism. He whipped up ethnic discrimination. He came to office by promising a border wall. So yes, he's guilty of contributing to the widening discrimination. But who voted Trump to power? The people of the United States, many of whom are still stuck in the era of slavery, who still find nothing wrong with racism, who still think a woman cannot lead their country, and who now may want to replace one white old president with another. So can you blame Donald Trump alone? Think about it.